Can everyone understand me fine? There's a lot of background noise, but we should be fine. So, good afternoon. My name is Maarten Decat. I'm co-founder and CEO of Illimity. And welcome to today's session about taking control of user access, specifically in the context of NIS2. A practical point, I don't mind being interrupted. There is time for Q&A at the end, but if you have a question at a specific slide, at something that I'm saying, just raise your hand and we can go into the details immediately. And let's start by giving the right example from the start. So raise your hand if you know whether there are no accounts lying around in your company that belong to people that already left your company. Who's in control of those kinds of things? Who exactly knows who has administrator rights on critical servers, on databases, on those kinds of systems? Very little hands. Okay, perfect. That's an important one. Who knows who has access to privacy-sensitive data, like customer data, employee data, all of those things? Okay, see the same hand, so you sound quite mature. All of these questions, that's really the essence of being in control of who can access what, of user access. And 20 years ago, being able to answer these questions used to be somewhat optimal in cybersecurity, but these days with SaaS and cloud and working from home, the network perimeter really has broken down, and the users and their access really is the only thing that still keeps your entire IT infrastructure together. And that's the reason why almost any attack these days starts with stolen credentials. It's the reason why modern cybersecurity approaches like Zero Trust, that they all stress minimizing the attack, the identity attack surface, or applying least privilege, those kinds of things. And that's also the reason why, if you want to comply to something like ISO 27001 or SOC 2, you have to do this, and the same for NIS2. So NIS2, that's a term that you'll be hearing a lot, I assume, these 2 days. Very briefly, what is it? I'm not a NIS2 expert. There are other people out there that can tell you way more. So I asked ChatGPT, or DALL-E, I should say, to create a nice picture to explain NIS2, sorry. It doesn't really tell us much, if you can see. I like the picture because it also stresses that it can't really work with text. But apart from that, what is NIS2? It's a European directive really meant to increase the cybersecurity and the cyber resilience level of critical infrastructure and critical organizations in the European Union. Very briefly, the difference between NIS1 and NIS2, first of all, is a broader scope. So maybe an ask here, the original NIS1 sectors really focused on critical infrastructure like healthcare, banking, energy, and so on. NIS2 broadens the scope to other sectors, including more of healthcare, also pharma, ICT providers, wastewater even, and then a number of what they call important sectors that are still should have control, but are supposed to comply with reactive governance instead of active ones. So maybe just to get a sense of the audience, who here is one of these critical sectors? And new into NIS2, or also, yeah? Okay, so that's interesting then. The second thing that is then really important to you guys is it's also less voluntary than NIS1. So in that sense, it means that there are detailed requirements, and there is oversight by auditors, and there are penalties involved.
A little bit closer to your mouth.
Like this? Isn't that too loud? Okay, sorry, I was hearing it my own voice, but okay. Then like this then. So there are also penalties, up to 10 million euros, 2% of the worldwide annual turnover, and so on. So it's an actual thing like GDPR was as well when that was introduced. And regarding those detailed requirements, it's 3 things. First, governance, meaning that the management of a company is now actually held liable, so you should approve what you're doing for cybersecurity, and you're liable if you infringe NIS2 type of requirements. Secondly, there are risk management measures that you have to take, so those should be proportional to the amount of risk that an organization is facing, whether it's a small organization, a large organization, the type of activity that you do, but you have to do certain things definitely. And thirdly, there are reporting requirements. So if something happens, every organization is now obliged to also report that to cybersecurity authorities and end users involved. Again, much like GDPR was also forcing us to do. And so for those risk management measures, the regulation even sums up a minimum list to be taken into account. Those include organizational measures like doing regular risk analysis, having policies around incident handling, business continuity planning, and so on, but also technical measures like basic cyber hygiene, vulnerability handling, and access control policies, all of that. So the challenge, the bad news of NIS2 is that it's a lot. As you can see here, if your organization that wasn't supposed to be doing all of these things, it's a lot to all of a sudden do, and there's an actual deadline with actual oversight and actual fines involved. So that's the bad news. The good news is, from a cybersecurity perspective, the security measures that you have to take aren't all that different from ISO 27001 or SOC 2 or many of those regulations out there. So it's not something new that we have to invent, but still you have to do a lot in a short time. So how do you start? Where do you start? And the first thing here is what's on the top, on the bottom right is that risk analysis. Really start from thinking what your crown jewels are, what you want to protect, what your most important systems and information are. It's completely different from a chemical environment to a production environment to a bank, for example. But think of what is essential to your organization and start from there. Second step is procedures. You do have to have some procedures to detect and how to respond to events if those occur, or when, I should say, these days. And then thirdly, start adding risk measures. And in that sense, work on those measures that decrease your risk the most. That's the most efficient thing. So because of that, if you think of risk, and nowadays we don't control the infrastructure anymore of many of the things that we host, and it's really through the front door that attackers come in, at some point you will stumble upon having to take control of user access. You will have to know whether there aren't accounts of people that already left your company that can be misused, because that's just risk lying around. You have to know who has administrator rights in your systems. You have to know who can access privacy-sensitive data, who can submit and approve contracts in the financial context, which robot accounts are active, which guest accounts are active, what the groups and roles in your systems all do. And then once you know that, also minimize that. Minimizing the attack surface for user access means applying least privilege. So minimizing the number of accounts in the first place, so that the risk or the likelihood of an account that is stolen, that is minimized, but also making sure that these accounts can use only what they actually need, so that the impact of a stolen account is also minimized. So that's our view on what you have to do, or what you can do as most efficiently around user access from a risk-based context. But if we put that against the focus of the identity and access management market, that's quite different. So I have an IAM background before we started Illimity, and if you look at the major IGA vendors like SailPoint and Armada, those are all awesome products, very extensive. And what they focus on is really automating so-called joiner, mover, leaver workflows. So, for example, if someone new enters your organization, you see that in the HR system, you know which department they're from, which role they will have, and then automatically the necessary users and accounts are created with the necessary permissions based on the role model and so on. If people move throughout the organization, then things are automatically changed. That's really the Valhalla that you work towards with a full IJ deployment. And that's an awesome value, especially if you're a very large organization with a large throughput of new people and people leaving. But it's also a lot to do. It's investing in a lot of connectors, a lot of business analysis of who should be able to do what. It's multi-million, multi-year projects. And again, if you're a large organization, then definitely do this. But if you're not a large organization, if you have to do a lot with a small security team, then probably this is just too much all at once. It's too much of a big bang approach. And so as a result, what we saw a couple of years ago was that many of those organizations are just not doing anything regarding user access risk. You might have some workflows automated in Entra ID for the core systems, but the general governance, the general oversight of all the users and permissions that you have, that was just lacking. And so that's exactly where Illimity comes in. At Illimity, we want to provide a more lightweight approach to user access governance, and that's really rooted in looking at the problem not from an automation perspective, but from a data perspective. So it means that our approach doesn't give you the whole automation that I just talked about. It's less than what other major vendors do, but it does give you insights in a couple of days so that you can identify your risks and clean those up and then run the governance processes like access reviews and so on to keep in control. So it's really focused on how to regain control fast and then remain in control. And of course, if you do want to automate some of the flows for your major systems that the majority of your employees has access to, then do that with a specific system, like a specific lightweight workflow engine, or even something like the workflows in Okta or an Entra ID. But definitely have visibility and governance across your whole landscape, so you know where the risks are and that you can clean those up. And so we work with companies, very briefly, that you all know, ranging from 500 people companies that have to do a lot with a small security team, up to companies of 50 or 100,000 employees even that want to strengthen their internal control. And really the focus here is on the essentials of user access governance. So what we advocate is a more data-driven, bottom-up, closed-loop approach, if you want some fancy words. It's really about visibility, knowing which users you have, which permissions they have, so you can then review that, both for the core security team, but also all the line managers and application owners that are responsible for a part of this problem in your organization, that you can act upon that, so removing unnecessary risk, but also monitor that, so you can prove that you're actually doing the necessary tasks, that you have the audit proof too, for example, NIS2 type of supervision, that you had that visibility, you identified some stuff, but you acted upon it swiftly. And that's a much more efficient way to get in control and show control over time. And so I'm not going to go into a demo of our product itself, but it's really focused on what I just said. It's focused on all of the connectors that you have, all of the applications, that you have in your system, and getting those users into a central location in a few days. That's really what we stand for. So you can then understand where your risks are, that you can indicate necessary changes and really and track those over time to do the work and show that you've done that. Monitor that over time, so if a new orphaned account is found, or if someone is made member of a critical group, or someone has gained access to a critical folder with employee data or CEO level data, that you are notified of that, and that you run your governance processes like the access reviews all on this same data platform. And so the idea is that this somewhat turns around the traditional IGA journey, where you start with this whole big bang business analysis, role mining, workflow definitions, joiner, mover, leaver workflows, and so on, and a lot of connectors with very extensive platforms, but instead this focuses on actual security value. So we turned that journey around, focus on identifying access risks, reviewing those, addressing those, and then getting notified, so putting some monitoring for the long term in. So you get in, after those two blocks, to this fundamentally improved cybersecurity posture as quickly as possible. That's really our focus. And so, again, this is mainly oriented towards organizations that are starting their governance journey. Some of our customers start there and just keep doing this with the access reviews and the monitoring on the long term. If you want to go beyond that, this also provides you with a data foundation to, for example, automatically mine roles based on what people can currently do, instead of interviewing all the people across your organization in the business, defining separation of duty policies, all of that much more efficiently if that's relevant for your company. But you don't have to do that. And so, to show that process of getting in control a bit more concretely, let's take a look at a specific case study. Here I picked an organization of around 2,000 employees, Belgian organization, lots of privacy sensitive data, but not a big bank or something, had to do a lot with a small security team. And at some point the CISO did decide to also tackle the problem of their internal users. The groups, the users in Active Directory, Azure AD, databases, local administrators across different servers, and so on. And so our standard approach with that kind of organization works in these 5 phases that you see here on this slide. And the first phase is really focused on that quick visibility that I talked about. So in this case, we think together with the customer. If you don't have a list of your most important systems yet, and that's definitely the first thing to do. 9 out of 10, that's Active Directory and Azure AD these days. And then it kind of depends on where you put your focus. If you have an operational system, then probably that. If you have databases, if you have a cloud environment, some organizations focus on file shares, SharePoint, those kinds of data environments. Whatever is important, that's the thing that you want to get insights into as quickly as possible. And so in the first phase, we work at speed, so meaning that you only use the out-of-the-box connectors in our platform. But if you have to do extra stuff like creating database credentials or opening up firewalls, just skip that for now. Ask an admin to do an export and import that, all to get you up to the moment that you have this visibility so that you can then start investigating and cleaning up in the phase 2. And so for that, we provide an extensive guide on essential cybersecurity controls for user access governance. I won't go into the details in this presentation. This is a talk of an hour by itself, but if you want, the QR code there is the guide to, or links to our website where you have this guide in its full extent. The things that it talks about are stuff like orphaned accounts, privileged accounts, access accumulation, and so on. Again, it's quite a lot. For this presentation, just understand the most important ones, 9 out of 10 are the orphaned accounts. That's a risk that you definitely don't want to be lying around. Privileged accounts, because you have to know what are the essential accounts for an attacker and you have to protect those. In a financial context, I would also say separation of duty. And then always there are some business specific controls as well that you know for our business that's really essential, and that's the things that you would then put into the platform. And what you eventually end up with is this overview, this data foundation with the users, the members, the roles, whatever is important of your organization, and a list of, let's say, 40, 50 accounts, 40, 50 controls, that really highlight where your most important risks are and where you should start working on to decrease your risk as quickly as possible. Those are things like, depending on your own data model, of course, but find me all active AD accounts that were linked to someone that already left the company, or that couldn't be linked to someone, or find me all accounts with test in the name that still can access some critical things in production. All of those things, you want to get rid of those. Or visualizing the current permissions of people in the same team where you would expect that all of them can do the same. That's typically, those red boxes that you see there, that's typically the result of people just moving throughout the organization, being granted more and more permissions over time. Those are the things that you want to ask a line manager to whether they should be revoked. Because probably, based on the data, those are outliers. Probably those aren't needed anymore based on what their colleagues can do. It's really those kinds of insights that you want. And in this case of this specific customer, they focused heavily on Active Directory first, had a very Microsoft-centric ecosystem. They quickly found some active orphaned accounts that they were then able to clean up in a matter of weeks, and this was really what they wanted to achieve. So the CISO was convinced that identity governance is a crucial part of their strategy. It had a ring to it of requiring a lot of work, requiring a lot of consultants, heavy time investment and cost investment. And with this, it really focused on decreasing risk as soon as possible. And in a couple of weeks, there were results. So definitely a good way of building some momentum and building goodwill with the business. And so the overall impact there was to decrease risk. We're now currently at this end of stage 2, I would say. Whatever I've explained right now, that's all focused on the core security team. So that's where the security or IAM team would use these insights themselves. But of course, if you're a decently sized organization, those people, well, you don't know everything yourself anymore. So at some point, you do have to include others as well. I'm thinking of line managers, application owners, maybe data owners, whatever your governance structure is built on. You want to include them. That's phase 4, where you use not the whole platform and smack them down with too much data, but rather access reviews, where you ask, for example, a team lead to review the potential orphaned accounts that you found on a critical system within his team or that were assigned to people in his team, and asked him to review whether these are actually not needed anymore and then remove those. And that's a much more efficient way than doing this manually with Excel sheets like many of our customers were doing before the platform. But you would have to include them, you have to ask them specific questions. And first you do that for the cleanup phase, so really with the goal of taking back control, that's phase 4 here. And then afterwards, when you have regained or when you covered your major risks, you keep on doing that, you keep on running the continuous monitoring and the access reviews every 3 or 6 months, depending on your exposure, to remain in control. And that's the essence of what we mean with achieving provable control. You're doing the work, you have the visibility, you're fixing actual risks, you're monitoring, and you have the audit proof in the system that you have actually done all of those steps. And again, the essence really is that we look at this as a sort of data problem. So in that sense, even if you don't do it with our platform, even if you want to do it just manually, all fine by me, but the essence here, so the homework that I give you, or the 5 tips that I can give you when you get back to the office is, first, start with a risk analysis. You have to do that for your whole company anyway, for NIS2 or any regulation that you're trying to achieve. And then define the essential security controls. Take a look at our website, at our guide. It will help you a lot, and map those to your risk, to your most important systems. Typically, again, orphaned accounts, privileged accounts, separation of duty, and business-specific policies. And then make it a data exercise. So don't start doing this by asking people just questions of all of the accounts out there, but try to collect your current users, current accesses across the systems that you identified as critical in step 1, and apply your security controls to that data to give you a sense of where you should actually focus your effort on. And then step 5, of course, act. So ask questions, and if you notice things that shouldn't be there anymore, act on that, remove those things, or disable them if you want to not make the risk too much at first, and then monitor that over time. So repeat the data gathering to show to your managers, to show to an auditor that you've actually done the work and that you're improving over time. You don't have to be perfect from day one, but at least now you can show that you're doing the work and that you're actively working and improving. And that's a major value for every security professional out there. And that's everything that I wanted to say. So if you're interested, if you want to know more, there's still time for some Q&A. You can also find us at our booth. It's completely the opposite end of the room, so it's close to the entrance. And if you're interested, take a look at our guide. So you have the one with all the controls there listed again, and also the IAM from a CISO's perspective. That's also apparently, based on the download counts, a good guide for security professionals that have to take or want to take a step into identity and access management. In any case, thank you for your attention. Are there any questions? Does that mean that it was super clear or super unclear? Clear? Yeah? Thanks. Well, if you have a question later on, just step by our booth. We have Duvel as well, by the way.